Welcome. This talk is called How to Write a Great College Application Essay. I'm Dr. P, and I am the founder and president of Crimson Coaching, which provides academic tutoring, test prep, and college counseling to students worldwide. I started, however, as a high school teacher. I've been a teacher since 1997, and in between went to get a PhD, came back and taught, and in 2014, I founded Crimson Coaching. So the two kind of biggest things that I do in my business are SAT or ACT prep and helping students with their college essay. And so the reason that I developed this talk was to kind of share a little bit with you my process of when I work with students one-on-one, sort of, putting back the veil of how to get a great application essay. Of course, having your own private coach is great, but not everybody is able to do that. So hopefully I'll be able to share with you some tips tonight. So lots of people sometimes ask me, why is your company called Crimson Coaching? And as you can maybe see from the mats of the photograph and the diploma behind me, they are the color crimson, which is the kind of color of my alma mater, Harvard. And therefore, as a coach, I called my company Crimson Coaching. And tonight's agenda, like most Zoom talks, I will speak for about 30 to 40 minutes. And during that time, you can feel free to put any question that comes into your mind while I'm speaking into the chat. It is really difficult for me to toggle back and forth between the presentation and the chat. So I'll go through my prepared remarks first and then answer everything in the chat. And I'm happy to stay as long as people have questions. So if you could keep yourself muted until the Q&A starts. Right now, we only have 10 people on the call. So if you'd like to, rather than putting your question in the chat, you could also unmute yourself. I'm fine with that. But before we go any further, I would just like to thank first all of you for showing up on a Monday evening, November 1st. If you have any friends who are applying for college who are a little bit older than you, today is the big early application deadline. But if you are a sophomore or a junior, which most of the people on this call are, it's also a hectic time of year when there's usually lots of tests and papers coming due. So thank you for showing up. And to Kim Carletta, the young adult librarian at Orangeburg Public Library, thank you for inviting me. And to Orangeburg Library itself for sponsoring tonight's talk. So as a trained historian, I always like to share my sources, and some of my sources are personal. So during my 25th reunion from Harvard, this is actually where I lived, my little dorm. It was called Dunster House. It is called Dunster House. I went to a talk by the longtime undergraduate admissions director, William Fitzsimmons, and he gave my classmates and I quite an interesting background into what admissions look like from the other side of the fence, and as well as, of course, my professional experience of working really closely with students for the past 7 years, both not just one-on-one, but I've also taught courses through Larchmont Mamaroneck Center for Continuing Ed on how to write a great college application essay. And so a lot of this comes from that. And then, of course, I also keep really abreast of the literature, and this recent bestseller, Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions by Jeffrey Salingo, does talk about the college essay, as well as Ron Lieber's The Price You Pay for College. So let's just talk about, what do I mean when I say the college essay, okay? Basically, I am generally referring to what's really a personal statement of 650 words on the Common Application, which is, or the Common App for short, which is a portal that through which students apply to many colleges and onto which universities subscribe. And when they do that, they accept that they will accept the personal statement that is asked by commonapp.org. So that's when I say the college essay, that's what I'm referring to. Of course, that is not the only platform through which students will apply to college. There's also the Coalition app, and that's actually got a slightly shorter personal statement. If you are applying to school in the UK, they use another called UCAS. And the University of California and University of Texas systems have their own portals through which you will apply to those. And they can do that because they are, as the most populous states in the country, and they have so many schools that form part of their universe. They can kind of dictate what their college essay will look like. I know for a fact, because I have more students applying to UC than UT, the UC system asks for 4 350-word essays. So they are really quite different than the 1 650-word personal statement asked by the Common App. And I tell you about this diversity so that you're prepared and that you start early right after your junior year ends, so that you're not scrambling to start writing essays at the last minute. In addition, more selective schools ask anywhere from 1 to the most I've ever heard is 10 supplemental essays. And those supplemental essays are on top of, that's why they're supplemental, the personal statement. And they can range anywhere from 25 to 600 words. So, if you're applying to a place like Harvard, its extra essay is 6 or 650. If you're applying to a place like Yale Engineering, you've got 10 more essays to write just for that one school. So again, all of this will speak to the importance of starting early. For this talk, when I say the college essay, though, I mean that one personal statement, because almost all the schools on the Common App will require that 650-word personal statement. So one way that you can start by to write a great Common App personal statement is by reading other successful personal statements. And sometimes students say, well, where would I get this? Well, the Fisk Guide that publishes the Fisk Guide to Colleges, which is a compendium of, I think, more than 2,000 schools in the United States. And that is sort of like the Bible of, little bits about each school. The same publisher publishes the Fisk Guide to College Essays, and they publish successful college essays. So you could, I'm sure, get that at Orangeburg Library if you'd like, or on Amazon. Then you can also look online for free. The Harvard Crimson, which is the newspaper, the student newspaper at Harvard, publishes every year the 10 best Harvard essay series. And I know that it goes back to at least 2019. So you can put in different years and, read several of them. I really don't think you need to read more than 2 or 3, though. And the reason why I say that is because students can get really freaked out by how good some of the essays that they read are. But it's important to keep in mind, first of all, these are the ones that are getting published. So, of course, they're really good, right? But they're also the ones that have been polished again and again and again and again. So you should polish your essay. However, your first draft is not going to look like those polished essays. So if you can't produce something that looks like those polished essays on your first try, I don't want you to get upset or discouraged or think, oh, I'm never going to get into college. Remember, you are seeing maybe the 25th draft of some of these essays, okay? But while you're reading them, you want to think, what elements made the essay successful? Really try to think, and I would actually write this down. I would print the essays out, write down what made them successful. I can tell you that before I even read any one that has been published, they all stayed on point. And that point was to reveal the author's personal brand. And the personal brand is, in how I define it, is 2 or 3 adjectives that describe that student and will pervade the entire application, not just the essay, but certainly the essay. So if the personal brand is the unifying element of successful college essays when you're reading them, when they're published, then I encourage my own students to start at the genesis and make sure you spend some time thinking about what your personal brand is. What do you want it to be? Okay. Now, I am not suggesting that you settle right away on 2 or 3. In the beginning, I recommend that you brainstorm as many adjectives as possible that describe yourself. And by the way, ask other people, teachers, parents, friends, coaches, if you can't come up with your own adjectives. But in the end, I think it's important to pick just 2. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that we are not all, as human beings, described by 17 different adjectives. Of course we are, right? But in 650 words, I really can only reveal 2 of them coherently. And the reason why those essays that you read that were successful is because they didn't try to do a million different things in that 650 words. They tried to do 1 or 2 things really well. Sometimes the adjectives that you brainstorm will cluster. And so if they do put them together, I consider them really one. So for example, sometimes, I do this with Google Docs with my students, and I'll after they're done, they'll share the document with me, and I'll say, okay, well, compassionate and empathetic and kind, those 3 go together, right? Hardworking, persevering, and determined, those 3 go all together. Okay. So if you want to show those 2 things, I think that those are really just 2 things. Okay. Because those are 2 clusters. Once you pick the 2 clusters or adjectives that reveal your personal brand, you should write them on a Post-it or some kind of piece of paper and stick it above wherever you will write your essay. Those are your North Star. Everything in your essay should be written towards those adjectives. Okay. You don't want to lose sight of that. And that's really quite important. The next thing that's super important, and I would say, I'll be honest, I think this is even more important on a nuts and bolts level than the personal brand, is that you need to answer one question alone. Please don't start writing about anything you feel like. And as much as I respect my fellow teachers, I really need to say that English teachers who assign personal essay writing in the junior year to students do not do them any favors by telling them they can write about whatever they want. Because when you go into the Common App, when you are a senior, you are going to have to pick the question that you answered. There are 7 prompts that you're allowed to answer. Okay. If you try to squeeze something that you wrote beforehand into one of those 7 questions, it is very difficult to do that. And I actually had a student from Brussels who, in all fairness, the kids in Belgium are not generally applying to schools in the United States. So she came to me with a really beautiful piece about the people that she volunteered at sort of like a community / homeless shelter. Okay. It was a beautiful piece, but it told the reader nothing about my student. And I said, I think it's actually going to be, you'll be better off if you kind of start from scratch. Now, she was starting early enough in the summer in between her junior and senior years that she could do that. Okay. So the other thing that I would say is if you think you are in trouble and that you maybe at some point may need someone like my help, make sure you try to do that like no later than say October 1st if you're applying early for November 1st. I recently last week had 2 brand new students. One came to me for the first time on October 25th, and the other came to me for the first time on the 26th or 27th. And they had these kids were beautiful writers. Their essays were beautiful, but they did not serve the purpose of a personal statement. I gave them tons of feedback, but in the end, they decided to go with the essays they had written merely because they didn't have enough time. So, the sad part is they kind of wasted their parents' money paying me to give them this feedback. But they also, I think as writers, they were totally capable, if they had had more time, of trying to write a better essay. And if they had seen a talk like this, they probably would have solved their own problem and never even needed me in the first place if they had just answered one of the prompts from the get-go. Now, lots of students, these 2 included, will come to me and say, well, what about question 7 on the Common App, which is, please feel free to share with us an essay of your own choosing. And I'll be really honest with you. I've had students that I work with privately want to do that one, but I only let them do that if they and I together jointly create a question. Because once again, when you are not answering a question, you can tend to go off and write what's a beautiful think piece about the people that you volunteer with, but it's not going to help you. So for example, one question a student and I wrote together was, what's your most prized possession and why? And she wrote this really cool essay about her water bottle and all of the different stickers on her water bottle and what they say about her and her high school journey. Super interesting question. We actually figured out the question after her first draft, but I didn't let her go beyond, because in order to shape an essay, you need to know what you're shaping it towards. And that question should have something to do with you. And if it doesn't, it's not going to help you get into college. Okay. So I would just say, without a question, you're really leading yourself down a rabbit hole that could mean hours, weeks, months of endless rewriting, and preventable rewriting, because ultimately you may decide that essay is not a successful one at all. Okay. So hopefully my tales of caution have convinced you to answer one question. However, you should brainstorm all of the options. Okay. Even if you're sure, I'm definitely going to answer number 2, or I'm definitely going to answer number 5. Lots of times students come up with great ideas that they never thought they might come up with when they try to answer another question. So brainstorming, just put down notes and, copy and paste the questions from the commonapp.org website and brainstorm all of them. And remember, no experience is too small if it could show your personal brand at its best. I love to use as an example the examples that I share with my students. I only have them read 2 essays. One of them was by this young man named Pavel, who eventually studied at Dartmouth. And he wrote his entire essay about polishing his car every Sunday morning. And you would think, oh my God, like the kid's applying to Dartmouth. Doesn't he want to write about something more, fancy than that? But the essay was great. It showed he was dedicated. He did this every Sunday morning. It showed he was methodical. He had a routine that he followed, and he did the same thing every time. And it showed that he was attentive to detail, because he would talk about, I hand polish this part, but I use the orbital polish on that part. And, I could totally see this kid going into engineering or something like that. So if he decided that his personal brand was methodical and hardworking, that essay did it for him big time. Okay. Now, no matter which essay question you think you're going to write about, I always recommend to my students that they write drafts for at least 2 questions, because sometimes the one that you think is not your best turns out to be your best. Now, the essay itself, when it's done, can't be any more than 650 words. But I recommend writing about 1,000, because it's easier to cut down later or have somebody else cut down later for you than to add words later on. Some really nice things that I've considered, I've suggested to my students to do would be to consider dialogue. Used sparingly, it can be very effective. Consider going out of chronological order, like maybe starting at a really dramatic moment in the hook and then going back in time to fill in some blanks. But don't go too far back in time. You really want to focus the majority of the time of your essay on your high school years. I like to say at least 80% on 9th, 10th, and 11th grades. Okay. If, however, something really life-altering, like God forbid one of your parents passed away or something like that, happened prior to high school, then certainly you can talk about that. But, I had another student who's a great writer who wanted to write about how she tried to win the Guinness Book of World Record for the longest piece of string in 3rd grade. And I was like, they're not admitting 3rd grade Jennifer, they're admitting 12th grade Jennifer. And what that tells me nothing of who you are in those intervening 9 years. Okay. So try to have the most be on your high school years. And the adage of your English teacher, show, don't tell, is super helpful for college essay writing. Try to use the 5 senses. I even had a student who, and I remember this 7 years later, he was one of my very first students that I ever worked with on his college essay. He got accepted to Princeton, and he's graduated from there now, actually. And he wanted to write about how hardworking he was to try to get off the bench of his ice hockey team, and how he would go out at 5:30 every morning and practice his shots or whatever. I'm not a sports fan. And he wrote about the salty sweat that dripped into his mouth. And I mean, yeah, it's kind of gross, but it also is such an effective detail that I remember 7 years later because it was so effective. And that really helped to show how hard he was working rather than him having to tell the reader how hard he was working. So obviously, after you write your 2 first drafts, you want to pick the one that works best. And a lot of times students don't know, well, how do I pick which one works best? I believe that the draft that showcases your personal brand more effectively is the one that works best. But sometimes you're not even sure of that. So ask a trusted friend, a guidance counselor, for their opinion. If your mom and dad happen to be particularly non-judgmental, that's great. Not every parent is. And, I advise usually for my students to show their parents the draft by around the 3rd or 4th draft. Because by the 3rd or 4th draft, you're much more removed from it, and it's a much more just a piece of writing than pouring your heart out onto the page. Okay, so I would also say that it's not your parent who's applying to college, you're applying to college. And some parents are great with that. And they really just want their child to be happy. Other parents, not so much. I've worked with a wide variety of parents through the years. So I would just encourage you to remember that you are the one on this journey, and you are the one who needs to be happy at college for those 4 years. And it's your story that's going to get you to the right place. Okay. So I think it's been pretty clear so far, but if not, let me just say explicitly, you really need to make time to revise. If you don't schedule that in, it is not going to get done. And I would also say that once again, you should kind of start from around July 1st before your senior year, so that you can hopefully be done with your personal statement by around September 1st. And if you're interested in sort of like the timeline of when you should be doing what, most of you are sophomores or juniors, feel free to go to my YouTube. I'll put up the link later, but I just gave a talk called Applying to College One Step at a Time. And that is literally like what you should be doing fall of junior year, what you should be doing winter of junior year, what you should be doing spring of junior year, so on and so forth. And in that talk, I talk about having that done by September 1st. And just take comfort in the fact when you are writing that even the greatest American authors, such as Nathaniel Hawthorne, have agreed that easy reading is damn hard writing. So if you feel like you are struggling, you are not alone. And that is even a more reason why you want to start this process early, so that you're not stressed to get it done on top of stress because it's such a hard task. This is not like an AP exam, okay? It is not like writing an APUSH essay or an AP Lit essay. This is a completely different kind of writing that requires a lot of psychological and emotional maturity and introspection. And, we're not taught how to do that in high school. So, sometimes people need help and time to do that. So as promised, I would talk about 30 minutes or so. To learn more, please do feel free to email me at info@crimsoncoaching.com for my college planning checklist. That's sort of what you should be doing when, and that actually extends from 9th grade all the way to 12th grade. If you email me, I'll send you a copy. Like Crimson Coaching on Facebook to get news of upcoming talks. Usually I try to do like a little promo video on Facebook Live. And so if you've liked Crimson Coaching on Facebook, you'll be able, it'll come into your notifications. You can also see the list of all of my upcoming classes and workshops for the month. I do it a month at a time. I try to kind of update it at the end of every month at crimsoncoaching.com. And if you subscribe to my YouTube, just search Crimson Coaching, or I'll also put the link into the chat. You can see that applying to college one step at a time and any of my other talks that I've been so lucky to record, like this one. So now is the time when I answer all your questions. So feel free to either unmute yourself, to throw your question into the chat. I know sometimes folks have to leave to do homework or go take care of dinner or whatever. So if you have to fall off the call, that's totally fine. Thank you for coming. But let's hear it. Any questions? And I should say too, while you're typing perhaps, if you think of a question tomorrow that you didn't remember tonight, just email me. I'm more than happy to to answer you by email. If you think of a question though while you're listening to any of the YouTube videos though, definitely put that in the chat because or in the comments for YouTube. So I'm going to just, I think, stop. Maybe I will stop the recording now so that we can. So the question that was asked was, how can you figure out what your personal brand is? What questions should you ask yourself? And what questions should you ask yourself to figure out what to write about? So first, the personal brand. That's a fancy schmancy word. I don't want you to get hung up on that. It's really, how are you described, right? What are some adjectives that would describe you? So for myself, for example, I think I'm generally funny. You might not see it on this talk, but like personally, I'm pretty funny. I can be outgoing, which that you could see in this talk probably, right? Smart, I think, definitely hardworking. So these are all qualities that I have been told, either I was told since I was a child or that I realized along the way. But not all of them would be ones that I necessarily am going to write about. So of the two of them, of all of those, I don't think funny and outgoing are particularly important for me to get accepted to college, right? I mean, it's nice that I'm outgoing and funny, but I'm not going to stand up comedian school, right? I'm going to college to get a bachelor's degree. So I might want to highlight that I'm smart and hardworking in my essay, right? So your first step is write as many adjectives as you can about yourself and figure out, well, I mean, I think like once I had a girl say that she was goofy, and she was kind of goofy, but goofy is not going to get you into college, right? Hardworking will, compassionate will, those kinds of things. If you're not sure about what kind of person they might like, check out the website of the school that you are applying to, right? So some schools, like for instance, Harvard, and I think that this, other people would, I think, agree who went there, is not known for attracting particularly compassionate people. It's not that they're heartless, but that's not the first thing you think of when you think of that school, right? On the other hand, they are passionate people. And I bet you can tell that from their website. I haven't gone on the Harvard website. There wasn't even a website for Harvard when I was a kid. But you can probably tell that those students are passionate and compassionate or empathetic is probably not like a huge thing, as opposed to, say, I think like Boston College, not too far away. I think those students with the Jesuit background are probably, I would dare to say, maybe known to be more compassionate. Okay. So, you could be both passionate and compassionate, but depending on the schools that you want to apply to, you might want to gear your personal brand towards that trait. Okay. So I hope that answers that question. In terms of what you write about, again, you can write about anything. Okay. I don't, the same student who was with her ball of string and as a third grader, we spent 2 full sessions at her request brainstorming different topics. And finally, in the middle of the second session, I said to her, Jennifer, you got to stop. There's no perfect essay topic. It's what you do with the topic. So you got to remember this kid, Pavel, who wrote about polishing his car. Normally you'd think, why the heck would anybody applying to Dartmouth write about polishing their car? That's crazy. But he got in. And he got in because it's how he wrote about polishing his car. Again, he showed that he was hardworking, meticulous, attentive to detail, all things that Dartmouth would want in a student. Okay. So I got to tell you, there's 20 million different things you could write about. It's all in the how you write it. So I think I'm less helpful on that point. Okay. Other questions? All right. Well, I am going to just stop sharing. If there are no more questions, I will again just ask you, or invite you, rather, I should say, if you're interested in sorry, I'm doing 2 things at once. In getting that little checklist, feel free to email me, or feel free to email me if you come up with questions later on that you couldn't remember tonight. I know sometimes, at least at the end of the day, it can be tough. I am going to just throw a couple links into the chat. That's what I was doing when I was getting tongue-tied before. So here we go. We're copying and we are pasting. So, I don't want to send this to just one person. I'm going to send it to everybody. So if there's my email, just in case you have any questions or you want to ask me something privately, feel free. Now is a really great time to start thinking about what your short, medium, and long-term goals are in sophomore, junior, senior year of high school. And if that is something that intrigues you, I have a free ebook on my website that will guide. It's sort of like a workbook that will guide you through that. And if you find that or this talk helpful, or you found it, educational, feel free to leave me a review at that link. I really appreciate it. It helps other families to find me online. But that's really all I have for this evening. So if there's no other questions, I would just say thank you so much for coming into Orangeburg Public Library, and Ms. Carletta for inviting me.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Oh.
And you have another talk coming up on the 22nd.
Yes, I do. I forgot. Yeah. And actually, this is a great audience for it because you guys are all, you're not seniors yet, right? You're mainly sophomores and juniors, which is, so it's called, and it's actually the world premiere of this talk. You guys are the first ones who are going to hear it. It's called Impact Projects, How to Stand Out during the college admissions process. So I know a lot of students were really kind of stymied in their extracurriculars during COVID. And so if that was you and you feel like, oh, I don't have anything, especially if you're a junior and you feel like you don't have anything on your activities list, definitely come to this because hopefully I can kind of jog your thinking and get you thinking creatively. There was a private question that somebody asked me while we were just chatting, so I'll just answer it to everybody. It was, how much weight does an essay carry to the overall decision process? And this is actually a really good question. In my last blog piece was all about the college essay, and since colleges went largely test optional in the wake of COVID because students couldn't take the SAT or ACT, and now many of them are thinking, why should we make students go through this anyway? It's not, we didn't get any worse of a class without the SAT. It might be the way of the future that the tests will be completely abandoned. And so what that means is every other aspect of your application, from your grades to the kinds of courses you took, to your extracurriculars, to your letters of recommendation, to your essay, count that much more heavily, because now they have one fewer piece of evidence or information upon which they can make their determination. So, the essay by all means is not the most important thing. Your grades and the kinds of courses you took are the most important thing by far, okay? However, I would say, especially if you were a kid who maybe didn't get top grades, but maybe you're a really good writer, this would be a great place for you to shine and maybe make up for those slightly lower grades. Or if you didn't have a lot of extracurriculars, right, maybe a fantastic essay could make up for that. So I definitely think, especially if you're not going to apply to college with an SAT or ACT score, you really want to make sure that essay is fantastic if you want to get into some selective schools. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. Well, and I hope to see some of you, or all of you actually, at on the 22nd. It's basically in 3 weeks from today.